Hello from VMware Explore, very special episode of the VMware Today podcast from XenTegra. This is Philip Sellers, your host, and we are on site at the VMware Explore event in Las Vegas, looking at all of the new announcements from VMware. And today I'm joined with Barry Browne, our Director of Solutions Architecture. Barry, how are you doing?
I'm tired, Phil. It's been an event. We were talking earlier at lunch that today is day 3 of the event, and so far I've racked up 30 kilometers. What's that in miles? 22 miles or something, just walking around the event. It's been a good event so far. You know, it's lots of networking, lots to see, lots to do, lots to learn. Just trying to soak it all in. That's the beauty of these events. You know, you walk all these miles, but there's something at the end of the rainbow, as they say, in terms of education and networking.
Yeah, thank goodness for air conditioning too, right? It's hot here in Las Vegas, but we're really happy to have the air-conditioned walkways. You know, the Venetian's a nice place. We can get around almost anywhere and not really have to worry about it. It's one of those great venues for an event this size, but I mean, I would estimate there's probably at least 10,000 people here this year.
I was talking to a VMware guy last night, and he unofficially, off the record, nudge nudge wink wink, said it's just north of 11,000.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. But just on the before you get past the air conditioning comment, last night between 5 and 7 was kind of a little bit of downtime. I went out to the pool. I lasted 15 minutes before I had to get out. It's just, at 5 o'clock in the evening in Las Vegas, it's still 32, 33 degrees, and for people who know me, pale redhead, sun is not for me.
Well, we've also got our friend Donovan Linton from XenTegra Gov. Donovan's a solutions architect for us. Donovan, how have you enjoyed the event?
I've actually enjoyed the event from the learning aspects, being able to learn about the new technologies that have been introduced by VMware as well as some of the other partners, and also the new, I don't want to say buzzword, but generative AI.
Oh, yeah.
Seems to be the topic of discussion.
Let me ask a question about that. What's the difference between AI and generative AI? Because there was always this distinction they were making during the keynotes.
Yeah, so this is a really, really great place for us to start, and I learned something this week. There's been predictive AI for a long time. So when we talk about a lot of the monitoring systems and the things that are looking for anomalies, that's all predictive AI,
right,
based in math, based in metrics. Generative AI is different in that you use natural language to interact with it, and it produces natural language results back for you. So very different take in terms of learning and creating of content or outcomes as opposed to predictive AI, which I think is the thing that I learned, and that was a huge takeaway for me, because AI is a huge buzzword. I think I saw on Twitter during the keynote it was mentioned 71 times or something like that. So
somebody's counting.
Somebody was counting.
Probably AI. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's funny we call it a buzzword, but I think it's going to become much, much more of a not a buzzword. It's going to become part of our everyday vernacular. It just was something it's part of the new normal now.
I think that's true. I mean, I was talking with someone in our marketing department, and the amount of things that he's using to help, on a day-to-day basis in his job from ChatGPT is pretty amazing. I think the consensus is that, you don't want to just take it and run with it. You still want to edit it. You still want to, brief it and make sure that it's correct. I mean, it's not a supplement for the human brain today, but it's certainly additive and assistive. My daughter and I used it to help create a resume for her. She's 16 years old. She's never had a job, but she needed a resume. So, scholastic activities, extracurriculars, fit those into ChatGPT, and out came a fairly decent resume. I mean, I was impressed.
And then you just got to tweak and tune, and all of a sudden you have not quite production ready resume, but something close to you can actually submit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's unreal.
Yeah. I think the thing that was surprising for me was the adaptability of it all, right? And being able to throw things natural language, because I think back to Splunk
Mm-hmm.
when it first came on the market, and that was one of their huge claim to fame, right? Was you could interact with this in a natural language search, and how far has that come? Because I don't know that I agree that was very natural language
Right.
back then.
Natural?
But,
No, not at all.
It's certainly evolved to a place where now we are getting into asking a question and getting real results.
Well, at one of the keynotes, one of the closing keynotes yesterday, there was a new feature they announced, or a new product called, I think it was called Smart Code, and they were showing how you give it, those that say I want to create X function in this language, and it does all the coding for you, and it's using air quotes here, the safe part of it, because it's actually validated and checked, and it will run on execute. So I thought that was fascinating. So from a developer perspective, these solutions coming from VMware are really game changers.
Yeah, I have to wonder, as we talk about generative AI in the terms of development, it still seems to me that the human is in charge of the algorithm, but maybe the generative AI is just carrying out the wishes and the actual code. But when does that inflection point change?
Mm-hmm.
When is it going to start creating the algorithm too? That's an interesting thing.
I think it's when it disappears, when we stop talking about it, when it can become a part of those workflows naturally without us actually having to interact with it. And I think that's where it really starts to take off, and it stops becoming a buzzword.
Yes.
Where when it kind of just disappears into the background and just works.
It's almost like brand names becoming verbs. How we refer to search today as Google.
Yeah, I need a
Google
Kleenex.
that.
Yeah.
I need a Kleenex. I need styrofoam.
Yes.
Or I have a styrofoam cup. Some things just become synonymous with it. So Donovan, I think that's a great point when it stops being a thing we talk about and it's just something that's done.
Or when the T1000 comes.
It was on the floor. You didn't see it. The Boston Dynamics robot was out there.
That's right.
That's going to be the first one.
Yeah, for those of you who weren't at the conference, it's really funny because we had several dogs on the show floor. We had a robotic dog from Boston Dynamics at the Veeam booth, and then we had real puppies that you could cuddle with over in another area on the show floor. So.
Yeah, they had a cool. What was the name of the puppy hugging place? It was really neat the way they named it. It's like puppy therapy or something. And I thought it was fantastic. You see grown men in there, rolling around with little tiny puppies, having a great time in the middle of the show floor. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it was definitely a highlight. I saw several friends call it out on Twitter. I was picking at one of them earlier today, and he's like, "I'm over by the puppies looking." And I sent him a meme, cuddled up with a puppy.
Yeah.
Looking there, folks, right? So, that's a cool part of the conference is we get together, we get to, go and have some fun. There's been all sorts of activities and things.
Mm-hmm.
We had a great time last night at the EEC party, co-sponsored with XenTegra, ControlUp, LG, and many of our other partners.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great time. It was great to talk to customers. Barry, as you're talking to customers after the keynote, what resonated with them from the week?
Well, so far it's been the product announcements specifically there's no game-changing announcements coming out of Explore 2023 from from the customer perspective, from my perspective, and you and I talked about this at lunch. The product announcements. I don't think even announcement is the right word, but it's very iterative. It's building on the core platform, the core product line that VMware has today. There will obviously be some new product announcements. We can get into it a little bit. The vSAN, was it vSAN Max? It sounds like
Max.
When I hear that, I think sneakers for some reason. And it was NSX Plus, of course. We'll talk about it in a bit. But it was really an iterative set of announcements. Is really nothing groundbreaking.
Yeah, Donovan. You're a former Citrite. You've been in the industry for a while. You've got fresh eyes coming into this. How did you feel, or what did you take away from the announcements in the keynote?
Actually, again, it was a lot of new learning for me, but to me, it did seem a lot where VMware was trying to be more modernized in a sense by taking advantage of vSAN and things of that nature. The NSX announcements of being able to modify your network and make changes to the workload similar to how you see in the cloud.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of that from a lot of the announcements as well as a lot of the vendors that are here today. A lot of the classic, I'll say classic, not legacy, vendors are now starting to embrace the cloud and embrace cloud concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a great lead-in to talk about NSX Plus and the announcements there. We have a number of customers at XenTegra that use NSX, so network virtualization. And, we're not changing with NSX Plus. It's still the same core technologies underneath it, but it's really kind of a portfolio that's been cloud enhanced.
Right.
And so the net of the announcement is that now they're adding cloud control plane for NSX. One of the great things that I took away from a briefing yesterday, you don't need to start over to adopt it into NSX Plus from a control plane and policy standpoint. So if you're an existing NSX customer, you've deployed NSXT, you can adopt that and continue to control it and create policy from the cloud. What it's not is it's not changing that management or control plane that we typically see in NSX. That's still on-prem. It's just giving you a construct to raise it to a higher level. One of the big announcements that goes along with it is the ability to create virtual private clouds. Very Amazon-esque construct, but a completely autonomous cloud environment, natted out to the rest of the world, and you can policy control it and set granular role-based access controls and things. So, really kind of raising that level from a large enterprise service provider sort of use cases with multi-tenancy and being able to regulate and delegate control for policies. So that's a big part of NSX Plus, but there's a little more there. I mean, as we talk about NSX Plus, I mean, this is very much what you were saying, very incremental. Where do you see advantages, I guess, for customers?
Well, before we go talk about advantage, I wanted to talk about the naming. So we have vSphere Plus subscription model.
Right.
There was no mention yesterday of NSX Plus if it's the same idea.
Yeah, and that's a piece that I don't have clarity on either.
And I've asked several people this question pretty bluntly, and it's all a TBD. Yeah. But from a license perspective, it certainly smells like it's going to be a subscription model as opposed to perpetual like we're used to in the old days.
Yeah, it does definitely feel like a subscription model, and this is another place where I think we're seeing a trend both in vSphere Plus, which we've talked about previously here on the podcast, where VMware is investing the new features into that subscription model, and so getting some of these things like the higher level of control, the constructs, is going to come along with that subscription change.
Yeah.
I think enticing users to make that switch.
Yeah, and for the actual advantages that you want to talk about, yesterday I did a hands-on lab, a deep dive into the NSX, and there must have been NSX Plus because I did see the VPC components in there that you can configure now, and I thought, that's a new button. Let me go look at that for a little while. And so there's real value in customers where you can manage your cloud environment, specifically your VPC, your controls around security groups, rules in and out of the VPC, all directly from your NSX console. That's fantastic.
Yeah, for me, I thought about some of the compliancy rules and things like that have affected customers that we work with and previous employers. The VPC construct is going to be a great way of maybe cordoning off that PCI environment.
Yes.
Away from the rest of your environment, so that maybe you limit the scope of your audits and things like that, so that you can have a highly compliant VPC, and then you can have a less restricted VPC.
And then the Wild West VPC.
Non-production.
Yeah, we actually call that a honeypot. Don't
we? Yeah, I think there's a lot of honeypots in production, Phil.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, NSX at its core has always been a technology that helps us address that ooey gooey center. Right? We always had that very fortified perimeter of our networks, and then on the inside of a Windows network, it's pretty open. It's pretty, I don't even know the word. I can't come up with the adjective right now, but it allows all the traffic. There's not a lot of restriction. There's not a lot of things that sit in between to inspect traffic. NSX gives us the ability, first, to get visibility of the traffic, and then two, to set policy at a very granular basis.
So let me ask a question. For a brand new VMware implementation, traditional vCenter, is NSX pretty much mandatory from your perspective, or Donovan, you too? Would you put one in without NSX today?
So certainly not from a licensing perspective. You have that
Sure.
choice.
Yep.
Unless you're talking about VM Cloud on AWS or AVS or one of the VMware implementations on a hyperscaler, then it is very much a requirement. So that's something that we call out. So from a technical perspective, that is leveraged in those hyperscale cloud solutions.
So let me rephrase my question a little bit then. When I say required, like, is it a no-brainer for a new implementation? Like, would you deploy vCenter ESX without NSX today? Assuming dollars are unlimited.
Well, assuming dollars are unlimited, yeah, absolutely. Because I want to have the visibility into that networking layer and how things are traversing the network. I also want the ability to layer on advanced features like IPS and IDS and security controls. So, it gives you a number of advantages. Portability of your network space, but the security controls, I think, are key differentiator.
And I think that's really an unknown with NSX. A lot of people, know it as the traditional microsegmentation, but the IPS IDS functionality that's within it, there's huge power in that.
Yeah, and so that's a great segue, almost like a page you to that way.
$20, Phil.
Yeah, that's the second leg of NSX Plus is the what they're calling the NSX Defense. I'm going to butcher the name. I don't have it in front of me, but NDS is the acronym, and it really is the IPS IDS functions, and so that's part of the NSX Plus package. And to your point, is it a subscription or is it a family? It really kind of feels like a family because you're packaging both the functionality of NSXT with the IDS, IPS functionality, and then the next pillar is NSX Intelligence, which is your formerly vRealize Network Insight. So all your visibility, all your analytics, your flows, all of that sort of thing. Also your planning, right? So taking a brownfield environment, looking at the traffic, and then planning the policies and rule sets that get applied in NSX. And then the fourth is AVI, or what was formerly AVI, but now NSX Advanced Load Balancer. So those are the four primary pieces, and the fifth is HCX Plus, which is something we'll come back to because
that's a whole deep dive.
So that's what we got introduced to. It's more of a portfolio. So it's hard to say if it's a subscription. I suspect what we'll find is that there'll be multiple levels of subscription here that include different capabilities.
I thought I saw there was going to be 5 versions of it. And maybe I'm thinking of a different product, but there's certainly 5. But the traditional beginner, enterprise, whatever you want to call them. But I think there was 5 flavors of it going to be available. What that looks like, TBD.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have the information on the exact packages, pricing, those kinds of things at this point. This was more of an introductory thing from VMware on a very strategic grand scale.
Strategic.
Yeah. So as we talk about like the IPS IDS and then we move into intelligence, I mean both of these are existing products today. They're licensable from other ways, on-prem or in the cloud. So again, I mean this kind of underscores your point earlier about this being a very incremental set of announcements. To me, the biggest change is really around AVI, and it's been a minute, admittedly, since I've done a deep dive on
join the club.
NSX Advanced.
Yeah.
But we were a former customer, or I worked for a customer that used NSX Advanced Load Balancer. To me, the appealing thing is I can take that construct and raise it to cloud. And so now I can deploy load balancers in multiple geographic regions and multiple different clouds, and then programmatically be able to interact with that and create and spin up, Kubernetes-based application clusters, VM-based application clusters, geographic or geo load balancing configurations. And so the cloud control plane gives me a ton of capability here in this particular load balancing case. And so that is pretty exciting to me, to be able to think, I can instantiate from this, VMware managed, VMware controlled location into wherever I need to do it. So stitching together some really valid use cases of multi-cloud deployment and, customer choice at the end of the day, wherever you need to run. I mean, when you think about load balancing, I mean, it's something that we definitely need to be able to scale and survive and help our applications to be highly available.
Right.
So, we do a lot with other load balancing vendors, but this one, as a software-defined offering, is very different than your traditional load balancing vendors.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do, fellas, is maybe on a separate podcast, is bring in somebody who's well versed in the load balancing product, and kind of, I have a whole bunch of questions I want to ask, but I don't think this is the right arena for it, specifically around load balancing within the NSX platform.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit about it, to tease it a little bit, it's very software defined. So it's different than your traditional load balancer, where you have like an active pair.
Stick in a couple of boxes.
Yeah, a couple of VMs, that kind of thing.
And I think it's very important too, as they start to talk about this multi-cloud type setup. So being able to put a load balancer, and wherever that application is, you know how to find it.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about user experience a lot because we're EUC guys at the end of the day here at XenTegra, and that user experience is important. So what do you want to provide to the user? A URL. They carry that URL wherever they need to go, and it doesn't matter what data center they're directed to, as long as the application comes up, as long as
the user doesn't care. That's right.
User doesn't care. So it's the magic, right? It's a great call out. This is a very scalable architecture. The whole point of what AVI and now NSX Advanced Load Balancer is the ability to scale. So it's that software-defined application to load balancing. And that brings us to HCX.
Right.
You hear a little apprehension here. This is a product that's been in the portfolio for a long time. It's a very specific use case when we talk about HCX. Donovan, have you even heard of it?
No.
Okay, so that doesn't surprise me, and I would suspect there's a lot of customers listening who've never heard of HCX.
100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
So, I mean, Barry, from your perspective, I mean, what have you heard? I know we've got a customer in New York that's using it.
I don't think I have any customers that are using it, so it's just not in the wild, as it were. Yeah. My own experience with it, similar to Donovan, is pretty limited, and it comes from strictly from VMware training. Okay. That's about my knowledge.
So what I have seen, it comes into play a lot when we're talking about extending your data center to hyperscale,
right,
to new locations, cross data centers. It's used a lot with layer 2 extension. So, taking your broadcast domain and extending it across the physical boundaries of your data center to something like VMC.
Right.
So it's often packaged with VMC. It's not the only time that it gets used. I'm sure it gets sold in a lot of enterprise environments where you want portability and the ability to migrate workloads without having to re-IP. But in some cases, to me, it feels like it's competitive to what NSXT's overlay networks can do. This is another one where it's harder for us to talk about it here.
Right. So we brought up HCX on this podcast. So what you just explained was kind of HCX yesterday. What was announced in the HCX world here at Explore?
I'm going to claim ignorance on that.
Okay.
Actually, I haven't gotten a lot of information. I saw that there is branding. It's called HCX Plus as part of NSX Plus.
Yeah.
But I'll defer to you. I mean, do you know more?
No, I don't. That's what I heard. I heard HX Plus, but I was wondering, what does the plus give us?
I think that's a topic for us as we do a deeper dive
Right.
On a follow-up podcast, so that we can kind of get a little more. I mean, there's no shame in admitting that this is changing fast, and we're getting information just like you are, as a customer, as a listener. So yeah, I mean, we're trying to figure these things out. What does it mean in real time here as well? So I think we've beaten NSX to death. There was another big one, and you mentioned it earlier, Barry. We had some vSAN announcements as
Yes,
well.
yes. vSAN's my new favorite toy. I love it.
To go with your Air Jordan Max.
Yes, that's right.
vSAN Max.
I don't know why I didn't go. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that's again incremental. Last VMware Explore, we met vSAN's ESA, the Enhanced Storage Architecture. It was a rethink, a redesign, really meant to help us with NVMe storage.
Mm-hmm.
Previous vSAN was really based around a capacity tier and a cache tier.
Old school.
Yeah, very old school.
Yeah.
Right? Spinning disk and
flash.
SSD.
Yeah.
And then we got all flash versions of that. But NVMe is a completely different animal.
Mm-hmm.
So VMware spent the time to rewrite vSAN to take advantage of the NVMe technology. And now vSAN Max. What is it different, right?
That's exactly what I'm wondering about. I heard I listened to the keynote, read the marketing material. I'm like, okay, what's new?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing to know, it's based on vSAN's enhanced storage architecture, so it's an all NVMe based technology. The big thing is it creates storage-only clusters. So we're not talking hyperconverged.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking something that looks more akin to 3-tier architecture.
What's old is new.
What's old is new, right? Just like a mainframe. We consolidate and then we distribute.
Right.
And we
Go to the cloud, bring it
and
back.
then we
Yeah.
distribute. So the same sort of thing's happening here. vSAN Max allows you to create a vSAN cluster that is storage only, and then you have a compute only cluster that can consume that storage. The benefits is it's a software-defined storage architecture. So you get the natural benefits of scale up, scale out. You get the ability to grow your performance and your capacity linearly as you add nodes and disks and things to the drive pools. So you get those benefits that a traditional dual controller storage array does not bring. A lot of controllers, well, all controllers have a limit, and you can't add more performance once you reach that controller.
The limit's the limit.
It is bound.
Yeah.
So this gives you the independence of that. Now, let's be honest. There are trade-offs here, right? Software defined often has a little higher latency than your traditional dual controller storage arrays.
You're not doing any dedicated hardware.
Yeah, you don't have dedicated hardware. You don't have the ASICs in the controllers. Some do, some don't. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing. But vSAN Max gives you another way to deploy vSAN and not have additional overhead.
There was one specific call like they mentioned in the keynote yesterday. It's only available in I think he said 8.0.3, which isn't out yet.
Yeah.
So
it's brand new.
Yeah.
Cutting edge. You've got to be on the latest release. That's also another requirement. Calling back to NSX, to adopt an NSXT cluster, you've got to be on the latest software release to adopt it in NSX Plus. So very much seeing what's in the latest releases that are to come out in the future.
Right. So to get newer technology, you got to be on the latest and greatest.
Yeah. Well, we're always pushing the boundaries, right?
It's the name of the game. Name of the game.
vSAN Max and vSAN ESA, definitely are a huge step forward for performance.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing, when some of the, the big bloggers out there get their hands on it and put it through its paces to determine, exactly how much performance you can gain with this, compared to your traditional vSAN or your old school 3-tier.
Yeah, I would love to see benchmarks and things like that. I'm sure those will be out in the future. The great thing is it gives you independence from a maintenance perspective. You don't have any additional overhead on the node, so if you have database workloads and things like that where you want the full capability of the processors, you don't have to dedicate any of that to the storage processes inside of a cluster. All of that gets offloaded to dedicated nodes. What else?
I want to talk about VMware ransomware recovery.
Oh yeah, we talked about this briefly at lunch. Yeah.
So ransomware, it's everywhere, right? So I listened to another podcast called Risky Business. You guys hear that? If you don't, it's a really good security related podcast. They have a section in the podcast this week where they just kind of rattle off names of companies that have been ransomware, and they're all big companies, and so it's happening every day to super big companies, super small companies. And so VMware has come out with this product called VMware Ransomware Protection. Again, at the keynote, they went into it at a super high level. Do you understand the architecture of what it's going to look like once it's out?
Yeah. So Donovan and I are actually working on a project together right now where we've done a super deep dive on this.
Okay.
And it's built on VMware's VMware Cloud disaster recovery product. So for anyone who hasn't heard of VCDR, it is a cloud-managed DR solution. It is a combination of a control plane that VMware has written to handle all the orchestration, the replication, and things like that, combined with AWS. So what you basically have is you marry your protection cluster, your on-prem cluster, or your hosted VMware vSphere cluster with this cloud service. And then,
is it only AWS? There's no Azure or GCP?
At this point, I haven't seen anything but AWS.
Okay.
I don't know if that's coming in the future, but current release that we were working on,
AWS only.
AWS, yeah.
Okay.
And so you marry it to your AWS subscription, and then the service will deploy a cloud file system. Did I have that right? And
like it is an AWS EFS file system. Is that what it is?
It's not. It's a VMware software-defined cloud file system.
Okay.
That gets deployed into AWS, and that is the substrate where all of your data gets replicated and stored in AWS. And then once you've got that, you can also create, or you will also create, a pilot-like cluster of VMC on AWS.
Okay.
So you have this cloud file system where all of your long-term storage, snapshots, replication happens, and then you have this pilot-like cluster where you're able to run your mission-critical services, maybe AD controllers, things like that, and that's your recovery zone. So that will also be where you fail over and re-establish,
verify, your
rehydrate the pilot.
Yeah. And so that's your recovery site. And the benefit for customers is that you can take a 3-node pilot light. Does that term actually make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
sitting there waiting, like your furnace.
Like your furnace, ready to be turned on.
Exactly.
And so it's a 3-node VMC, and that's where you will run all of your recovery. That's also where you can run your testing. And so everything is charged by the hour and by the terabyte or tibabyte.
Yes.
And so you have this very cost-effective thing because you can go in and the pilot-like cluster can be done at a 3-year commit. It's always going to be on. And then during a disaster, you just turn on and expand into more hardware to be able to handle your full workload or whatever you need to restore. So that's VCDR. Now we're also talking about, and the announcement was ransomware protection layered onto that. Donovan, do you want to talk a little bit about the ransomware? I know you've been working in this for our customer, and this was a big deal to me because Barry and I were talking last night at the party. It's not a matter of if ransomware is going to happen, but when
Mm-hmm.
at this point in time for customers.
Yeah, it's actually a very huge subject for us, being myself working on the SLED side, the government side, where we have a lot of these organizations that are being impacted by ransomware. So it's a topic that we're having a lot of more often these days. But it's very important, like when you talk about ransomware, to create these immutable backups, so that in the event that something does happen, you have a backup that you can analyze and make sure that that hasn't been infected with the ransomware. Like there's no dormant code sitting in there which you can verify, and to be able to restore and recover from that without having to pay for a ransom.
Yeah, I mean, immutability is something that I think is a basic fundamental requirement for backup at this point in time.
And insurance.
Well, and you know that's a whole tangent of a conversation. You know, went through a cyber liability renewal last year that was pretty tough at my previous employer. There was a lot that our carrier, our insurance company, required of us in terms of adjusting how our domain admin accounts were used, making sure that we didn't have service accounts that had domain admin privileges. They're becoming much more granular and selective about the environments they're willing to cover for cyber coverage.
Because there's so much ransomware out there.
There's so much loss at the end of the day, so they're having to pay out so much. So yeah, it's not only the impact to the organization, it's also the impact to the bottom line in terms of the insurance and the ability to even get insurance to cover yourself.
So the project you guys are working on, how do you define, recovery time objectives? How do you set, we're going to be back online within 48 hours, 72 hours. Maybe walk me through how you guys figure something like that out.
It comes down to the customer and what is acceptable on their terms. So if they have an application that is critical to their business, maybe they have a lower recovery time and recovery point from that perspective. But if they have an application that's not as important, that's not the focus when you experience an outage or a ransomware attack or something like that. So it's very specific to the customer and understanding their environment and how they view going into a DR type of scenario.
Right. Is it fair to say the lower the recovery time objective, the more expensive it's going to be?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, in some regards, it's also a technical limitation.
How fast you can actually...
Yeah. How large is the data set? How fast can you rehydrate it? How quickly can you bring things back?
Right.
So each individual technical solution may vary in terms of what you can deliver in an RTO. RPO, very much dictated by business terms. And, there are times where you have to make different architectural decisions to be able to achieve aggressive RPOs. If you've got a very change-intensive database, it may be impossible to achieve near real time.
Right.
You may only be able to do 15-minute or an hour, just because of the amount of time it takes to make those delta replications into whatever solution you've got. So at the end of the day, we take an advisory, consultative sort of approach, analyze all the applications, the VMs, group things together, and so we recommend, and I know our managed service practice does this for our DRAS customers. They go through and they help them build all of that foundational grouping, and then from there you start to build your run books to be able to make the changes and to fail things over and all of the steps that are necessary during a failover to bring the application and make it come back online. So there's a lot of planning work that accompanies DR solutions.
I also want to point out one affected group that you left out from companies being attacked by ransomware, and that's the customers. We see a lot of change these days because now companies are aware of ransomware. They have insurance. They are taking things to protect themselves from ransomware. So a lot of times they don't have to pay a ransom. And so what we see a lot now from the attacks is the information that is being stolen ends up on the dark web, and that is the information of their customers. So that is a huge part of it now, of not only being able to recover from ransomware, but doing more work in protecting the data in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great call out, and the brand impact to companies can be severe. I overheard a conversation while I was sitting in the hub, our little hangout area here at VMware Explore. I overheard another technologist talking, and he was talking about that brand reputation impact in terms of ransomware. We have to think about that. I've been affected by multiple breaches. I've had Equifax, free subscriptions to Equifax monitoring offered to me because I was part of a breach and an affected population. I think we've all hit those sorts of things where our data has already been lost.
100%. Yeah, I was impacted by that Move It one that just happened a month or two ago.
Yeah.
So the government of Nova Scotia, they were using Move It appliances, and of course there was a massive vulnerability, and hundreds of thousands of citizen data was taken, and we all got free monitoring. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, would be better if you didn't lose it first. But
Yes.
thanks for the monitoring.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reality that we're all dealing with and trying to navigate.
And there's a whole ecosystem popping up around it. Like you and I were at a booth the other day. We were talking to a new company, relatively new startup, and all they do is build hardened, immutable appliances for you to, and that's all. That's their business.
Yeah. Is that Object First?
No.
No. So that's
It was
companies.
It was a company I couldn't pronounce. I actually had to say, "How do you pronounce your name?" And it's like, we named it this strange on purpose so people remember us, but I don't remember it.
Well, it's funny. So, some of the Veeam, there was a group of folks that were formerly, I believe, with Veeam. I may have this story wrong, but they went out and created Object First, which is like an S3-based appliance with immutable backups that Veeam and other providers can use as a target.
This is identical to the solution I was just talking about, but I know it's not Object First, so wow.
It may actually be their product name is a little weird.
Oh, okay. So Object First is the name of the company, but the product is something else.
I'm Googling it now to call back to what we just said earlier. When it becomes synonymous. Oopie?
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the same company.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this to me is again back to that thing I said earlier. Immutability in your backups is an absolute requirement.
Yeah, and the old rule of thumb from a system administrator perspective, backups are absolutely useless unless you can restore them.
Oh yeah, and as we're being advised, the attacks are growing more sophisticated. So they want you to pay the ransom at the end of the day. So they're also attacking not only your primary data, but also your snapshots and your backups, and they're trying to take those safety nets away from you as a user to make you have to pay the ransom.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a session yesterday on ransomware specifically, and the first thing they do is go in, delete your volume shadows, they change credentials, delete backups that they go after, and then they kind of do some reconnaissance of your environment and figure out where the weak points are and unleash the payload.
Well, and that's another great point. You mentioned it earlier, Donovan, but sometimes the malware sits dormant in your environment, and to your point, Barry, it's sitting there watching in that idle mode, so you may be infected for much longer than you realize, and you may just revert back to a place where you're still running the malware. So, layering on additional tools is hugely important. We really didn't talk about it in a keynote, but this is a place where
AI.
Yes.
And so
you're laughing.
What is that doing over there?
we've come full circle.
Yeah.
But this is a place where the AI really comes into play, and
you can kind of learn normal behaviors versus anomalies in traditional administrative traffic.
Absolutely. And so, this is from a VMware perspective, this is where the Carbon Black portfolio comes into play. There's a lot of AI built into the cloud products and the detection products in the Carbon Black suite. So it's a great complement to what VMware's also doing in the ransomware protection with their DR service.
Yeah, I heard somebody talk about yesterday that it's fine, Windows get ransomware, blah blah blah, but a lot of the newer up and coming ransomware groups are going after ESX, that was new to me. I didn't realize that was happening.
Yeah, it's funny. I worked with a security professional, and a great guy, very, very paranoid, as many security folks are. He never trusted the kernel of ESXi as a place of trust.
Okay.
So forced a number of things, separations, gaps between clusters and things like that in the environment. But it is software at the end of the day. It is a thin software, which is great. It's been purposely designed to be, limited attack surface, but it's susceptible to...
And it's much bigger than Windows. So if you can get to the hypervisor...
Yeah, and take everything with it.
You can find the data and everything else without having to be stuck within Windows.
Yeah.
And so this is a place where I do want to throw in one last concept before we close. The Intel announcements that they talked about from a processor standpoint. Intel and VMware are doing work together to be able to take and control and mitigate vulnerabilities in the silicon. And I thought this was really interesting. I mean, this sounds sci-fi to me.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, you think about programmability, but to be able to reach into the silicon, into the processor, and mitigate these, I mean, that's a pretty huge thing. And we're early in this journey.
Yeah,
but, that was one of the announcements that I found very interesting. What do you think?
Well, when they announced it, I was thinking back to the Spectre meltdown days, like it was a flaw. But so they're introducing this new control and protection in the hardware layer. If they don't get it right, you're gonna have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So.
And we all lived through Spectrum and Meltdown and the impacts to our workloads.
30% cut.
Yeah, it was a huge performance issue.
Yeah, so I worry about things like that. If part 2 of that is coming when they talk about these advanced security features within the CPU.
Yeah. With every advancement, there comes.
I'm being a pessimist, Phil.
That's okay. We'll just say that you're on the security side.
Yes, there you go.
You're paranoid.
I'm like your friend. That's right.
That's right. It's been a great week, and I think even with incremental announcements, I mean, we're over 40 minutes of talking here, and we haven't even begun to go deep on a lot of these topics. There's so much stuff that got covered here at VMware Explore. We're going to be unpacking it for weeks and probably episodes and episodes to come.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, guys, I want to say thanks. I mean, this has been a great week. The highlight for me has been being able to hang out in person. Barry's in Nova Scotia. Donovan
Toronto.
is down.
Would you guys stop it, man?
And Donovan's down in
South Florida.
South Florida, yeah. So, and I'm up in North Carolina. So there's very little time that we actually get to hang out together. But it has been a pleasure just getting to talk and catch up and see my coworkers face to face.
Yeah, it is nice. Like even just having lunch before this call is great. Just hanging out, shooting the breeze.
Lunch.
Even if the lunch was a mediocre conference lunch.
He didn't like his plant-based meatballs.
I love those for them. So, everybody that knows me, I'm not a greens kind of person. But Barry and I had some plant-based meatballs.
Yeah.
They were very tasty. So, just a note to the kids listening, always listen to your parents.
Yeah.
Try that broccoli. Try that cauliflower. You never know when you're going to find something you like.
And if you don't like it, cover it in ketchup. Try it again.
Or cheese, right?
Yes.
Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us on this episode. We appreciate you listening. And until next time, this is VMware Today podcast from XenTegra.